Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I am your host, Francisco Gonzalez, and I am excited to introduce you to a dear friend of mine, Fergus Hodgson, who is coming to us from Fort Collins, Colorado today. Fergus, how are you doing?
Doing great, Francisco. Excited to chat with an old friend and just talk about life and entrepreneurship, which is your focus.
Well, I'm especially excited to talk to you because both of us, first of all, you're from New Zealand, but both of us have spent a lot of time in Latin America, and Fergus has a great new book here called The Latin America Red Pill. Before we get to that, though, of course, if you're listening to this podcast, maybe for the first time, maybe for the 151st time, who knows, please subscribe to us on any of the platforms that you listen on, whether that be Apple, Spotify, what have you. And if you're just listening and you want to watch us, we're also on YouTube. So be sure to go to YouTube and type in Agents of Innovation Podcast in the search bar, and you will find us. Also, many of the people who have been on this program are now featured innovators in the Fearless Journeys community, a community I started about 3 years ago to help people build an entrepreneur mindset. And we do a lot of fun things. Fergus has gotten together with us a few times on what seems to be our annual dinners now in Denver, Colorado. He's driven down from Fort Collins to make the trek, and we get together a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs and maybe aspiring entrepreneurs. And it's been fun, usually fun dinner locations in Denver, so you don't want to miss that, especially if you're in Colorado. I usually make it out there in the summers because that is the only time of year that a Floridian can handle Colorado, a Floridian like me who doesn't really ski too much. Anyway, but one of my brothers actually lives out there too, so it's a good excuse for me to get out there. But also, we do a lot of great fun group trips, especially in Latin America. I've taken groups to Guatemala, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, and we're actually going back to Guatemala in January. If you're interested in that trip, go to fearlessjourneys.org and go to our travel section of the website, and you can find it. And if you like to maybe dabble in cigars like I do, we're doing a trip to a tobacco farm in the Dominican Republic in February. In addition to that, we're going to have a lot of other fun in the Dominican Republic. So it's going to be great, and we're going to go with the Don Doroteo Cigar Company and actually visit their farm and have an exclusive experience there. So this is a way we really try to connect you with entrepreneurs and innovators across the world through Fearless Journeys. So check it out at fearlessjourneys.org. Now, back to getting red-pilled about Latin America. We've got Fergus Hodgson, who, in addition to him writing this great new book, The Latin America Red Pill, Fergus is actually originally from New Zealand. He has spent time over here in the Western Hemisphere where he now lives. And he's also the publisher of Impunity Observer. And he's also runs a consultancy firm called Econ Americas. He's really, dabbles in he's a writer, a thinker, a philosopher, dabbles in a lot of spaces. A traveler like me in some ways, but seems to be settled now in Colorado. He's an athlete. We're going to get to that a little bit later. He's done a lot of running competitions. So, but Fergus, welcome back again to the Agents of Innovation podcast. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about maybe the early days of Fergus, your story coming out of New Zealand?
Yeah. Thank you, Francisco. I'm glad to. And the truth is that I feel very fortunate to have had the childhood that I did, that I grew up on an organic sheep and cattle farm in remote, rural part of New Zealand. So the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. And at the time, I didn't realize what a privilege that was. And we had, a beautiful environment. And of course, the world has changed so much since then. I tell people that we used to ride horses to school, which tells you, what kind of era that was. But I got sent to boarding school when I was 12 years old because there was no school near us. And then I was bored at university in New Zealand, so I looked around and I received an athletic scholarship to come to the United States, and that changed my life. That was a really important moment because coming to the United States, you could say it was disruptive to my way of thinking. It really challenged me with different ideas, and I loved that exploration, right? So I've not been to every single state, but I've explored the United States to an incredible degree, and much like you, have an affection for the entrepreneurial society culture here. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been in the United States pretty much ever since college. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I went back to New Zealand for a couple of years and tried to make the Olympic rowing team. I did not, but so that was 2007, 2008. And then I also went abroad because this is one of the challenges with the whole immigration system, that I never had until about 2 or 3 years ago permanent residence in the United States. So I was always coming and going on job permits or whatever. It was a bit unstable. So I lived a year in Argentina, almost 2 years in Guatemala, and then I was just traveled a lot. I spent time in Canada, Ireland, too many places really. Yeah.
So you did that. I guess this was about a decade or so now that you were traveling a lot in Latin America.
Yeah. So I started in 2010, and you could say I finished up at the start of 2019. That's when I moved back to the United States, and I've visited many times, of course. I've gone back, but I've not actually lived in Latin America since 2019.
And I remember there was a short, at least some short period where you lived down here in South Florida, right near Miami. I remember we got together once or twice there.
Yeah, so Francisco and I go way back. It's a wonderful thing that we both had this affinity for laissez-faire capitalism or classical liberalism, and so we got to know each other through, I don't know if it's still called this, but the Atlas Network at the time, a series of think tanks all across the United States, and I met many wonderful people through that era. And then I spent 3 years in the Miami area as editor-in-chief of the Pan Am Post, and that was an amazing time, Francisco. Really, I was working very hard, but I enjoyed it a lot, and I miss being able to just go run down to the beach on my lunch breaks. I was in Hallandale, and also it was a thriving place. Now it's even busier now, but just a lot of action, a lot of sort of excitement. All the exiles from Venezuela. It was just kind of like this flowering city, and I guess it's continued to grow since then.
Yeah, and I think I ran into you somewhere in Miami a year ago or something. We just happened to be in the same place at the same time. But
yeah.
But what I wanted to say to you was, man, if you thought Miami was happening 10 years ago, it's just blowing up now. I mean, it's crazy. But it's just so many people moving here, so many new buildings going up in downtown Miami. And Brickell and that whole area, but even just all of Florida. And we've just gained so much in population, and particularly since 2020. I run the Economic Club of Miami now, in addition to Fearless Journeys, and the amount of great people I meet, and they're all some of them have just come here within the last few months, some of them in the last couple of years, but so many entrepreneurs, people that you would generally meet in Silicon Valley. But now they're in Miami, or maybe you might meet them, somewhere in the financial capital of New York, and now they're in Miami. And so all this convergence, and then of course the people you mentioned, the flow of immigrants does not stop. It might be actually accelerating, particularly from places like Venezuela, which everybody in Latin America seems to view Miami as the capital of Latin America now. So it's interesting. But Fergus, you've gone through a couple iterations. You've written a few books now, and this book, brand new, The Latin America Red Pill, I really want to talk about it because I've already read half the book. I just got it a few days ago. It's on Amazon. And, I mean, what's really cool about this book, you want to summarize it for people a little bit about what you did here with this book? Yeah,
gosh, there's so much to say. So the summary is just that my concern is that most people have vague stereotypes about Latin America, along with leftist media narratives and marketing narratives. And I sought to give the raw or unvarnished truth about the situation, just direct from firsthand experience on the ground and as a journalist, editor, commentator. Because basically my concern is that, two things which go together. One, that there are many myths about Latin America, and that Latin America suffers from tragic underdevelopment. And so I wanted to both challenge the myths and explain what could be done to increase the development. Yeah.
Well, you do a great job, and one of the things I like what you do is some of your chapters, a lot of your chapters, are actually republished from articles you wrote, back in 2012, 2014, even all the way up to 2024. There are brand new additions in here, and it was really nice the way you mark them, and also you don't just stay in one place, right? You've got a chapter on something in Colombia, and then you go to Cuba, and then you go to Guatemala, and then Argentina, and all these places. And what's cool is I've been to a lot of these places, I feel like I've spent a lot more time than most people have, but probably not as much as you, and over such a long period of time as well. And so it's really cool the way you do that. And then I think what's great is, and I actually, by the way, I studied Latin American history in college and particularly also in grad school. And the myths you're talking about are, you're totally right on the money, because I hate to say it, but a lot of these academics, they just want to push a particular narrative, and also they are not on the ground. Some of them, maybe they went there for like a study abroad when they were in college, or they did like a little thing there, but a lot of them are just talking from someplace very far away about a place, and they're putting their own, I hate to say it, but a little bit of their own colonialism, their own imperialism on the place from what they're thinking. And you're actually on the ground there talking about, what it's like riding in a bus halfway across Peru or something, and what you're seeing and visualizing, and then coupling that with the policy situation. So it's a very unique book.
Yeah, I could hardly find a better person to talk about this than you, Francisco, because, of course, I don't know all the details. We've not spoken about it in depth, but I understand that your parents or grandparents came from Cuba?
Yeah, my dad came, and also my grandparents, his parents.
Right, yeah. So one of the reasons why there is some emotion in this book. I won't deny it. It's a bit of my heart is in there. Is that I have known so many exiles from Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Everywhere basically, and it really hurts, because I don't know about your own family's case in Cuba, but many of the exiles have let's say hundreds of years of history in these countries. It's not easy to just let go of that legacy. So let's say economic underdevelopment, it has consequences. And even beyond economic underdevelopment, tyrannical governments that go beyond just, let's say, incompetence to actual tyranny, that's what really breeds the exodus.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, it's very sad to continue seeing, and again, I just talked about Miami, and Miami was really built up more by particularly Cuban immigrants and many immigrants that have come from other places. And so this just continues. By the way, Fergus, I think I discussed this with you, but I actually did my first trip to Cuba this past January.
I think I saw that on one of your updates. People should know I'm a fan of Francisco, and I read not all of your emails, man. You're a productive guy, but most of your emails, and I really enjoy it, just because you're pushing the boundaries. Also, and just to plug your Denver events, these are also heartwarming occasions. I really feel privileged to go to those too and meet wonderful people. So I come out inspired, and I did pick up one copy of your own book, The American Dream. Is a terrible thing to waste, and because you see people who've really pushed the boundaries in their own lives, and often I think if we don't, it depends who we surround ourselves with, right? And you've obviously surrounded yourself with pioneers, but that's the whole point of Fearless Journeys, that people are pushing the boundaries in it. So it is inspiring to be among such people.
Well, no, you're one of them now, so thank you. But you talked about your own experience in Cuba. I went to Cuba earlier this year for the first time. It's, I had a lot of emotions, because it was, first of all, going to a place that my grandparents and my dad left, and my grandparents, have since passed, and they never went back. My dad is still not gone back, although I'm hoping I'll convince him here soon. And but it's a very challenging place to go, because a lot of people actually are very interested in going to Cuba. They're like, Francisco, when are you going to do a Fearless Journeys Cuba? And I said, I don't know. Like it's a very it was great to go for the reason of just landing and putting my feet on the soil and just seeing this place that I also have had a lot of just personal interest in, like its history. It's got a great culture and history and everything like that. And the people were really wonderful people. I mean, I was actually kind of surprised how joyous and happy a lot of the people were to meet me and meet other people. But I say it's a very hard place to go because they literally have no resources. Like there's nothing left. It's like,
try using an ATM card there. I mean, good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I wasn't even expecting to use an ATM card, and that so my expectations were low, and yet to even go in and be like, where do they get food? Like there's nothing here. Like people are running out of stuff. Like where do you get, like I was looking for a lighter. I couldn't find one for 3 days. Just little things like that you take for granted here, and they have nothing. I think, again, it's been 65 years since the revolution came there. It's gotten obviously tragically worse, but also now you've had a whole couple generations who know nothing but this situation. And yet, let me tell you something, Fergus, that might have changed since you went there, because you mentioned in one of your chapters that they had no internet connection. I would say that is changing now because every single person I saw had one of these. And in fact, when we asked adults, parents, what are some of the biggest problems facing children today, I could not believe the answer. The answer was they're so addicted to their phones. And I thought, wait a second, I thought at least in one place in the world, like people would be addicted to their phones. And all of these young people, I mean, I met people in their 20s and 30s. They all have a phone. They're all on Facebook, Instagram. They're seeing everything. Some of them are connected to me now, some of the people I met, and still message me and like my posts and things like that. So I think the thing that's changed is like they are all seeing what's on the outside world, a little different than, say, North Korea, which isn't letting anybody see anything on the outside world. But the other thing that's changed, I think, is that the Cuban government is like, you want to go? Bye, see ya. Whereas 30 years ago they wouldn't let anybody go, and so there's just been actually this huge. The other big thing that's happened in the last 2 years is Nicaragua has opened up a visa for Cubans that want to travel. They're not going to usually stay in Nicaragua, but they're going to travel to Nicaragua, and over 500,000 Cubans have actually left Cuba in the last 2 years alone. 2 years alone. So. I don't know what I heard. It's something like 6 to 10% of Cuba has literally left.
Because it's only about 10 million people, so 500,000 is a huge move. Yeah.
So this is like the story of, obviously Cuba's one of the more tragic cases because they have an actual, communist government, authoritarian, no resources. Enemies of the United States, like all these sorts of, you can go down the list. But you've got a lot of more complicated situations. Let's say in one of the places you and I both love, like Guatemala. Tell us about maybe some of the more complexities of a place like that that's maybe generally friendly relations with the United States. We've had an interesting history going back with them to the Cold War period. But they're right there. There's a ton of Guatemalans that live in the United States. So every Guatemalan I know and got to meet actually much like Cuba, all have family of some sort, have somebody that they know living in the United States. But anyway, it's an interesting place though, where about half the country still lives in pretty much extreme poverty, whereas others may live as nice lives as us here.
Yeah. Okay. So you're right. I went to Cuba in 2014, and at that time, the internet was just arriving, basically. In that there would be a few cafes you could go to and get basically expensive internet, but people would still go there, and you'd see these people kind of huddled around the cafe, all connected to the internet. And then you could have some limited internet, which I assume was tracked and kind of confined at the hotels for foreigners. So presumably, since then, it's been hard to hold back that tide. Now Guatemala, as you say, it's one of the most conservative countries in Latin America and one of the most U.S.-centric, given proximity and maybe a lot of the close history in terms of relationships. So Guatemala and Paraguay are the only two countries left in Latin America that recognize Taiwan as a nation rather than the People's Republic of China. So the there's a lot to say about Guatemala. I'm not sure what to add, but Guatemala is economically depressed place, but there's a close relationship. Like, yeah, many Americans have moved there, many Guatemalans have moved here, and people would say it's a bit of a little America, given how many U.S. franchises are there and the like. And of course, you've taught at Francisco Marroquin University, which is a very U.S.-centric U.S. university, given that the founder went and studied in Louisiana and then went back and literally founded the university to promote U.S. values.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible place from that perspective, and I was able to see Guatemala through an interesting lens. One being able to teach at UFM, and being in that community of people there, but and then just learning about and then also meeting a lot of expats who have been living in Guatemala, some for 40 years. Like our friend Jake Denberg. I think you probably got to know Jake at Jake's restaurant. At some point, but
which restaurant is that one? Which restaurant is that?
So it's Jake's restaurant. Jake's actually been on this podcast before. I think he was episode 101, the first.
I'm sure I've been there, but I just it's lost in the memories now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have been there, and I don't know when the last time you were there, but his restaurant's been around for 30, 40 years, but it moved into a new location right before I got there, I should say. So probably around end of 2020, 2021, it moved to the it's a brand new shopping plaza in Zone 10. I'm forgetting the name of the plaza, but it's a Estacion.
Fontebella, are you talking about?
Yeah. No, Estacion.
Okay, I lost you there, Francisco. It's still recording me though. Yeah.
Yeah, we got you. Sometimes this thing will interrupt a little bit, but yeah, we got you. I could still hear you. But no, anyway, what I'm saying is there's a lot of expats that have moved from either the U.S. or Canada or Europe that are living not just in Guatemala, but in a lot of places in Latin America. I've had some of them on this podcast. I could think of James Nuveen, who's down in Medellin, Jers, who's been all over and is lately in Argentina. And so, and even this Vince from My Latin Life, who has a very popular Twitter account that sometimes seems to sort of scold what's going on in the U.S. and Canada and how great life is in Latin America in contrast. But Fergus, what would you say to somebody who might be considering like, hey, maybe I'm frustrated by 1 to 10 different reasons of life in the United States right now, or Canada or wherever, and I'm thinking, life might be better, maybe more affordable, maybe cleaner, maybe healthier, whatever, in Latin America. What would you say to that person who's maybe considering that kind of move?
Okay, so we cut out there a little bit, but as you say, there are plenty of expats living in Guatemala. Guatemala City, Antigua, Panajachel would be the 3 places I would think of initially. I'm sure there are other outposts. Okay, I mean, maybe this is a bit tough, a bitter pill to swallow, but I would actually, aside from my own book, but there's another book which changed my view of the world called The Sum of Our Discontent. And it looks at how numbers make us irrational and how the very best things in life are intangible and often difficult to measure, right? So how can we measure the quality of our friendship or the taste of a great steak or whatever it may be? It's very difficult. And what tends to happen is that it's a bit like almost like dating apps where people narrow their focus to a few attributes as opposed to the broader picture. And so I would say to them that it is true that if you go to Guatemala, there is 0 tax on foreign income. They do only territorial income tax, so only money you actually make in Guatemala is taxed. Further, it is true that, especially if you look around, you could get a lower rent than, say, living in Miami, for example. I mean, that's But so you might get something for about 1/3 the price in terms of a decent apartment, right? So let's say you're paying $2,000 in Miami, maybe you pay $800 in Guatemala for a similar place. Now, okay, I live right near the border between Wyoming and Colorado. I live in Colorado. and plenty of other people do too. Wyoming has no income tax and a lower sales tax than what we have here in Colorado, and a much lower cost of living. Okay. Why is everyone not flooding across the border to live in Wyoming? There's more to life than, as much as I'm pro-liberty and want limited government, whatever, there is more to life than cost of living and taxes. And I fear that a lot of people who read into cost of living and taxes, I think it's missing the forest for the trees, the saying, where they are focusing on some elements but missing the bigger picture. And I would ask them, okay, so why do you think for generations Guatemalans have been leaving, and now remesas or remittances are 20% of the Guatemalan economy? Okay. Why don't so if Guatemalans themselves are leaving and they have zero cultural integration problems because they're already from there, there's something to be explained there. So if you go there and Spanish is not your first language and you look like you and I do, you're going to have both integration problems and you'll have whatever problems the locals have, and they've been leaving for generations. So the question then is, why are these challenges here? And I can go into detail. For me personally, I had a really hard time with the air pollution in Guatemala City. There was a kind of an acute problem that I didn't want to be breathing in fumes all the time, wherever I basically could not escape. But aside from that, I thought that in the long run, I would struggle to build a healthy community, except with, ironically, other expats. Right? So that's what typically happens, that these expats from the US will cluster together with other expats. One of my long-time friends there, he's been in Guatemala almost 50 years from New York. He goes to a bar every Friday and meets with other Americans. That's his community. And he speaks great Spanish now and he's integrated, but it took him decades. And they would still see him as a New Yorker and not a Chapin or Guatemalan. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think there's there's a lot of reasons people do that. I think maybe it's the maybe the cost of living, where there's a phrase that maybe a lot of expats have used, and that is to basically earn in dollars and spend in pesos,
right?
And
or quetzales in the case of Guatemala.
Yeah, quetzales in Guatemala.
I'm sorry.
And so you kind of see this, but this is a really interesting, because as you talked about at one point in the book, maybe early on in your time in Latin America, I forget where you were, but you said you were trying to get a job and maybe you were going to teach English or something, but it was the pay was so low. The actual pay you would get from a company there was so low, it just wasn't worth it. I think and I don't know if this is like a new thing or a newer thing because of technology now, since maybe 10 or 12 years ago. But with the ability for so many companies, U.S.-based companies, allowing people to work from anywhere, people are like, well, why don't I just work from Medellin then? It's beautiful down here, and I get all the benefits of I get all the benefits of how far the dollar goes here, and I could still make the same type of salary I make from a U.S.-based company. They don't care that I'm living here. I'll go to a meeting in the U.S. a couple times a year if I have to.
Okay, so good question, and I make all my money online, right? I don't have to be in Colorado. So I could easily move basically tomorrow to Medellin, which is a lovely city, by the way, or back to Guatemala City, and I don't. Okay. So it is true that you can't, it is muddying the picture. Now, one of the challenges is that it's really not an apples to apples comparison. Because, for example, if I want to get a guanabana or a maracuya smoothie here in Fort Collins, well, they don't exist, right? So, but if I'm in Guatemala or Ecuador, I can get that right away. I love it. I miss those things, right? These jugos naturales. Anyway, but let's say I want to get a water distiller or a rowing machine, or even an electric oral irrigator. You have to import them, right? And you can't just go on Amazon and when you can, but then you have to set up a Florida address and they send it through and then they charge you this exorbitant tax to get into the country. You realize that there are a lot of complications that go with this, on the surface, lower cost of living. Even when it comes to dental work, so I do get some dental work done in Latin America, but yes, the cost of labor is low, but then they have to pay much higher import taxes to get the ingredients or the mechanics to be used. So I really warn people about reading into let's say the superficial metrics. Further, you've got to, this is why it's appealing particularly to people who have, I hate to say it, but a short-term focus or have a fast life strategy that they're looking for a quick fix to their challenges. What's going to happen to your children? Do you think they're going to want to stay in Guatemala? Probably not, right? So my good friend's daughter was born in Guatemala, but do you think she feels Guatemalan? No, right? She feels like she's still American and lives abroad. And it just is my observation that expats who move there, okay, you might have an online income, but what if you want your child to start a business or get a salary job to get started? Well, there's a disconnect there, right? And so you and I make our money, but that's because we have established a network in the United States and are now profiting from that in a healthy fashion. But if you start out in, I don't know, Nicaragua, forget it, right? So you will be competing with every other Nicaraguan to get some kind of telecommuting role. And so this, like I said, this is where it's just this whole experience of now it's almost 15 years exploring Latin America and a few years living has raised my awareness to longer term thinking and what is really important in life. And so, for example, here in Colorado, my main community is the running or fitness community, you might say. People don't just run; they do swimming and triathlons, whatever. But I simply could not find that in Guatemala. Get out, it just would not exist. And also, try going for a run in Guatemala City. Forget it. I mean, you're taking your life into your hands. Even if we ignore the fumes, trying to go for a 10-mile run through Guatemala City, get out of here. I mean, I've done it many times. I'm just saying that it's not my favorite thing to do, and I feel like I'm really on a suicide mission when I do it. So, not because people are going to kill me or rob me, because I won't be carrying anything, but because of the traffic, right? And so, anyway, I just, so it raised my awareness to the importance of community, and whether I like it or not, I would have a hard time long term being accepted into that community, that they will not consider me one of them. Further, but here in the United States, even though I'm from New Zealand, and obviously everyone can tell that as soon as I talk that I'm not a local, it really has no impact on my life. Very little. You'd barely notice. Maybe if I moved to a very rural area, but in general, the United States has an extremely open and welcoming community in my experience. And it allows me to plan for the future. This is the thing. I believe largely in human rationality, right? So when people make decisions about moving, often they make mistakes, but in general, they're making a rational decision. So you've got to ask yourself, okay, so who actually does move to Latin America long term? It tends to be, let's say, young single guys who are looking for adventure or a new start, and maybe it offers them that, right? Or you're looking at retirees on fixed incomes. For them, maybe it makes sense. Move to Costa Rica or whatever. And also maybe just hippies trying to escape the conventional world. They want to go and be with other hippies in Panajachel. Fine. So if you were seeing ambitious young professionals move to Guatemala, that would send a much different signal, but you just do not see that. Just as you don't see them moving to Cuba, which of course would be insane. But Guatemala, has a lot more going for it than Cuba. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. So Fergus, again, your book is called The Latin America Red Pill. Can you explain? I think this has maybe some who might be a fan of a Matrix and of the Matrix movie. And what are you doing with red pilling us? What is What is this all about?
Yeah, so you must know this analogy. Did you watch The Matrix?
Yes, of course.
Absolutely, yeah. We're similar ages. So back in the 90s, The Matrix was just the biggest thing ever, man. It was the great. There's sort of, and in those days, let's say the digital effects was so new and sophisticated, and it was just very exciting. And I love that movie. And I'm just saying that it was almost a cultural phenomenon at the time, The Matrix. And then there were sequels which couldn't live up to the first, and that it was hard to impress people with the same thing over again. But the short story is that The Matrix is this digital version of reality, which is not true. People are just plugged into this virtual reality, and they assume it to be true. They don't know the difference. But there are people who are living outside of this digital reality, and they're trying to basically wake up the people inside and bring them out. And so they go to the main character, which is Keanu Reeves, and his character is called Neo, and they say to him, Neo, you can choose. You can stay in this virtual reality phony world, or you can know the truth. The red pill is knowing the truth, but the truth is actually much less pleasant in this phony reality, this fiction you live in. And so I'm saying that sometimes the news is less pleasant, but I would rather share the truth about it. And so this is my red pill. I'm telling the truth about Latin America. And it's tough because, of course, just like you, I mean, probably most of my friends live in Latin America. I mean, we've been so deeply embedded in that part of the world that I have so many wonderful friends there, good people, and then exiles. So I don't want people to take this as some kind of personal attack. I'm just trying to be frank about it, because unless we look honestly at the challenges in Latin America, it will never change. And one of the big myths I go after is that Latin America's challenges are the fault of the United States or the British or the Spanish or what have you. And I just think that's a cop-out, a scapegoat. It's a bit like if you go to Argentina. One example of this is when you go to Argentina, you will see all these Marxists complaining about the fondos buitres, which means the vulture funds, these funds who had the audacity to lend money to the Argentine government and want to be paid back. Oh, terrible, right? And so I just thought this is one great example of people blaming foreigners for their own mistakes. And I don't want to contribute to a continuation of this scapegoating. And another example, to give people maybe a more understandable example, is that back very shortly after the Cuban Revolution, Che Guevara was at some kind of Pan-American meeting. I think it might have been the Organization of American States, an organization like that. And he was complaining about the lack of U.S. aid to the regional. The U.S. was already giving aid, but he just wanted more. And I think at the time maybe JFK was newly elected and he had promised so much aid, and Che Guevara was saying it's not enough. And I just thought, get out of here. You want us to give you more money? And of course, 60 years have passed, more than 60 years, and nothing has changed in that regard. And the aid has probably just made things worse. So so my basic red pill is giving the honest reality on the ground and not deflecting blame to people outside the region.
Yeah, that's great. And so, look, we could look at a lot of. By the way, I mean, I think we can make an honest assessment in some ways. U.S. policy today, or maybe even in the recent past, has not helped people. But I think maybe for the other reasons, right? Like, I have plenty of criticisms for the U.S. State Department. And
exactly.
Fergus, I've probably retold this story in a few different places now, but when I started living in Guatemala in 2021, and after being there a month or two, and I had various friends who were considering coming down to visit me, I had conversations with different friends who didn't even know each other.
Sure.
And they were like, "Oh, Francisco, I'd like to come down, but I went to the U.S. State Department's website, and it told me how dangerous Guatemala was, and my wife's not going to let me go down there with her, and and then I heard this again and again, and I looked around and I said, dangerous. I was like, it's no more. It's
as dangerous as going to New Orleans.
Yeah, I thought
probably
how many
New
U.S.
Orleans is probably more dangerous, to be frank. I mean, it is dangerous, but the U.S. has pockets of that danger as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about many U.S. cities right now. Philadelphia, Chicago, like all these places. Like I'm like, way more dangerous than any place I ever went to in Guatemala. Are there pockets of danger in places like Guatemala? I'm sure there are. but just like any big city or anything like that. But anyway, I just thought to myself, I don't think when I see the State Department doing that, and then you couple that with what does anybody in the United States know about Guatemala? Probably the few things they know. I mean, I'm talking about an average person who doesn't have time to read books and look at things more deeply because they got a lot of other things going on in their life, and they probably just flick on the news and see, look at all these migrants leaving Guatemala. It must not be a great place, right? So I think you kind of couple all these kind of media portrayals, State Department warnings, all these sorts of things, and you go, well, maybe we're not doing such a great job helping these people out. I mean, we're just telling people that it's a horrible place, don't go there. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we're just sending a bunch of money down there to help them out, and that money's not doing anything.
Yeah, so great points. So I don't want to say the United States or foreigners have been saintly or angelic in their meddling in Latin America. And you and I know that unfortunately, U.S. foreign policy is not aligned with the wishes of U.S. voters. There's a disconnect there. So even though most U.S. voters want largely a hands-off or non-interventionist foreign policy because they're just tired and they know we're broke, the people who are actually in the foreign policy bureaucracy or establishment, they have an incredibly elaborate social engineering inclination. I mean, even the quote-unquote conservatives, and I've got it, that's one of the chapters in the book, which I know, it's a long book. I mean, you've made a great attempt, mate. Even they, the quote-unquote conservatives, their level of social engineering or interventionism defies my comprehension, to be frank. So also, it is the case that the U.S. has had inconsistent intervention. So on the one hand, they intervened in Grenada and in Panama. These are military interventions to stop what they saw as a little communist uprising. And that was under Reagan and I think H.W., the senior Bush. Mm-hmm. So on the other hand, under Jimmy Carter, they basically favored the uprising or revolution in Nicaragua. So, and today, it's clear to me or anyone who's following closely that the long-standing officials in the U.S. State Department have a progressive or leftist allegiance. So they would have no problem with someone like Gustavo Petro getting elected in Colombia, even though he is bosom buddy with the Chavista dictatorship in Venezuela, which is insane to me, right? And they'll even celebrate these elections. So one of the conclusions is just that, yes, the U.S. has, when it has interfered, has been, let's say, unhelpful on occasion. And I, in the book, call for a new Monroe Doctrine, which basically says do not intervene, but keep out other bad actors, right? So this area of the world, the Western Hemisphere, still the U.S. should offer leadership and, let's say, protection to maintain trade or whatever. But all this social engineering, pushing progressive agendas, even, for example, promoting, let's say, female entrepreneurs, discriminating against men in favor of women, I hate to say it, but that just disrupts family, the nucleus of the family, that you are taking away that provider role from men that is held families together for millennia. And so just put a stop to all this. Also, I have one, I think, one chapter is called foreign aid rewards bad behavior, because it literally goes to the most failing countries. What? Right? So if you develop a bit and become like Costa Rica, you're going to get less aid. Or even like Panama. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, if you're in a country that has such limited economic opportunity and 20% of the economy is already just remittances, I hate to say it, but aid has a huge allure. And people, the educated classes will set up all these crony businesses with NGOs and the like to tap into that. However, I want to try to finish on a positive, because I know we don't want to be a downer here. I have a chapter profiling a gentleman whom I've met, Yusuf Amdani. He's a Pakistani who moved to Honduras a little over 30 years ago. And he's now, as far as I can tell, one of the richest men in the country. So it took him 30 years to basically buy up half the country. And I explain the strategy he used. And he has his own book about this. So I read his book, both read and listened to it, and met with him personally. And so if you want to be an entrepreneur in Latin America, he offers a wonderful template for making that happen. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I'm listening to you here and I'm thinking about, U.S. foreign policy, particularly through the State Department, and noticing that we're going to soon have a new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
Yes.
Somebody that both of us have probably met and gotten to know different people surrounding him over the years. And, first of all, he's just one guy, right? He's the guy at the top, and that's very important, and he'll have a lot of leeway to do a lot of things. But there is this whole system within the State Department. Maybe it's the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, the deep state State Department, right? So, but so we'll have to see how the transition goes for him, and there's 190 countries in the world, right? I mean, that we have some level of relationship with all of them, whether they're our enemies, adversaries, friends, allies, trading partners, what have you. But we have a lot, of people working to build relationships and maybe build bridges and connections and things like that. So, but I think what's interesting about Marco Rubio is, his father's from Cuba, his parents, his family, and he has also developed a lot. He speaks fluent Spanish. He's developed a lot of relationships with different leaders in Latin America as well. So we'll have to kind of see if Latin America. By the way, Fergus, I think I sent you a text. I got your book the other day. I was about 50 pages into it or something. Actually, I think I was even 20. I was like 20 pages in it because I had read your introduction, and I have to say, you really red-pilled it fast here. In terms of I just left like, man, I've always had so much hope for Latin America until I just read Fergus's opening chapter here, and then somebody sent me a text at that moment.
Yeah.
It said Marco Rubio was just named the next Secretary of State, and I thought, as I was reading about how the U.S. has paid not the right kind of attention to Latin America and all these sorts of things, I thought, well, here we go. Maybe this is the hope I'm looking for. But and really, not to get too political, but I do wanted to also mention that we have some different figures who have emerged lately in Latin America. We have Javier Milei down in Argentina, who was the first foreign leader that President-elect Trump met with since becoming President-elect this term. Javier Milei was just here, not too far from where I'm at. He was here in South Florida.
For the party.
Yeah, for the big party. And there was hundreds of pictures online. Everybody wanted their picture with Javier Milei, who's become this, libertarian champion and against the Peronist. He's got a big hill to climb down there, but he's at least making waves and making some level of impact, even if it's just on the levels of ideas. And then you've got maybe some mixed reviews, but at least you have a different kind of leader in El Salvador, Bukele, who seems to be friendly with all of these characters in the U.S. that I just mentioned, whether it's Trump or Marco Rubio or whoever. And so, maybe we've got some glimmers of hope happening in Latin America from even like the political situation. But so I just want to mention that, but also I want to come back to the point you make in your book about one of the biggest challenging things for Latin America itself is they just need a stronger rule of law. This is just something that is just totally missing, and it's maybe something that we take for granted here in the United States. But anyway, I'll let you comment on any of the topics there that I just brought up. Yeah.
Yeah. So first, I've got to admit that I was shocked and pleased that Javier Milei won. So he's basically a right libertarian or paleo-libertarian, and you could hardly choose a better man for the job. Now, however, one of the, let's say, subtle or not so subtle points in the book is that the challenges in Latin America are bottom up. that, yes, I mean, one of the maybe prominent themes in the book is that I hate socialism, and socialism has destroyed Latin America, right? So there's really no doubt about that. And looking at places like Venezuela, just, seeing that the negative government policies really, and I've got a chapter, 6 reasons why Venezuela has real socialism, just to make the point clear. And it's one of my most enjoyable chapters because it's almost like satire, but it's not. There is a satirical article about Venezuela, but there's another one, just me outlining what all the Venezuelan socialist policies, I mean, it's just, your mind explodes when you read it. But so this is the challenge that every now and again, a relatively classical liberal leader does somehow make it through in Latin America. So in Ecuador, they had Guillermo Lasso recently. They have had Javier Milei. And there was Vicente Fox in Mexico, who for the region would be considered relatively classical liberal. So, but they really struggle. They really struggle. And this is where there's a little bit of a different flavor to the electorate, that we just had Donald Trump elected. And this is, by basically any definition, a populist victory. It is a victory for the electorate or the voters against the power centers of society in the United States. So you can choose any power center, basically, and it's pretty much 90% against Trump. And I feel this sensitively because a few years ago I graduated from Rice University, and the caustic view towards Donald Trump at that time, because he was just finishing off his tenure, was everywhere. And I just thought it was misguided. But basically, so that begs the question, okay, so what is this populist sentiment in the United States? And, it's not all limited government, classical liberalism like you and I would want it to be, but a lot of it actually is. He literally campaigned on shutting down the Department of Education. And it was well known that he had Elon Musk and Ron Paul waiting to basically cut government to the bone, or as much as they can, within limit. He got away with that. And that was, look at all the social media. Everyone was loving it. Everyone was going for it. I'm going, good. I mean, Javier Milei is the only politician I've ever seen pull this off in Latin America. And of course it is awkward because Latin America is a mixture of different people, and Argentina has more of a classical liberal intellectual community, so it's not really anti-elite so much there. But my point is just that there's an underlying problem in Latin America that the people do not trust each other. Why that is, that's a more complicated question. I mean, that's tough to answer, but it is a fact that in places like Scandinavia, more than half of people trust their neighbors. And even in New Zealand, where I grew up, I know there's 57% of people trust their neighbors. Whereas in Latin America, it's basically below 20% and often well even below 10%. So for some reason, people do not trust each other. And it's very hard to reverse that because when you have an area of low trust, that infects everything, the police, the courts, contracts, and people then change their behavior, and it almost reinforces the low trust, that then they kind of separate and go their own ways, and they don't build that just kind of harmonious interaction which would foster even more trust. So they go into their gated communities and hide away. And to me, like I said, that's why I don't think any one man or one policy is going to flip Latin America. The good news though, yes, so I agree that Marco Rubio versus the alternative, versus the establishment, people who are incumbents in the State Department, is a better alternative. I don't know him personally like you. I've not actually met him, although you'd think we would have, given all our kind of going back and forth. But I've not met him, but at least he is aware of the problems, given his family lineage. So versus other picks, he's a much better pick for Latin America. So the other notable, let's say, development for Latin America is that, as you mentioned, just any level of trade has proved to be incredibly beneficial. So they now all have vehicle, the roads are congested in Guatemala because everyone's got a vehicle in a short period of time, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, once Latin American GDP gets close to $1,000 per person per month, or let's say $12,000, even just more than $10,000 per year, which some countries have surpassed or are around that level now, that means that they can afford to get vehicles and cell phones, and they are enjoying much higher levels of development just through open trade. So long as that continues, great. Although there are negative elements to that too, that their fertility rate is dropping, just like here, you know. So they're taking on many of the Western problems at the same time. So what to say? Yeah, Marco Rubio, I'm relatively supportive or sympathetic to his case. I don't know him personally or know him that well, but I would be wary of anyone thinking any kind of savior can come from the political sphere. That is really tough. And because economic development in high trust societies grow incrementally and slowly. So I note the term wiki constitutionalism, which is not from me. There's a Cuban in Miami who first used that term and brought it to my attention, that Latin America has an incredible penchant for updating constitutions. I mean, it's out of control. Every new administration that comes in wants a new constitution. And New Zealand, where I'm from, doesn't even have a constitution, right? So people think that these constitutions are going to save things or change things. Forget it. Also, like I said, populism in Latin America in general is something to be very wary of because of what I call the anti-capitalist sentiments. And it is true that the Cubans who came here in the 60s, you know, your own ancestors or, you know, lineage, they were very anti-communist. And obviously I mentioned the Texans, the Tejanos, the long-time Hispanics have been in the US for many generations, and even before the US was the US. They tend to be relatively pro-limited government and conservative, whatever. But whether we like it or not, it just is a fact that new arrivals from Latin America by more than a 2-to-1 rate will vote for the Democratic Party or vote leftist. And that I find that hard to understand, but it just is the fact.
Yeah, so first, going back to something you said, I think very, very interesting. The level of trust that people, you know, really don't have with each other in Latin America, because this is something that goes deeper than just like the need for a rule of law or abiding by a constitution, right? I mean, maybe those sorts of things could reinforce it, but I think you're right. I mean, that is maybe the number one thing two people in business need to have with one another is trust, right? And so whether it's contracts, whether it's, you know, whatever it is, I mean, I think that is that erosion of trust, or even just the lack of trust to begin with. So that's something that's really got to be internal to a society to learn, to build. I don't know exactly how we teach it other than just through example. But definitely it's something that's needed.
Yeah, just about that. So I feel so fortunate to have had many experiences or a lot of exposure to this challenge. For example, when I went to Buenos Aires on a trip with my business school, and even after I'd lived there, I still just went back because I wanted to see my friends, what have you. But we went and looked at some successful entrepreneurs or successful businesses in Argentina or Buenos Aires. And can you guess which was, in my mind, basically the most successful enterprise there?
In Buenos
National
Aires?
sport. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, the most successful was, the River Plate, Real Plate? What is it?
River Plate or Boca Juniors.
I think it was the one with the red. I'm sorry, I'm not a big football or soccer man. Yeah, so we went to the River Plate headquarters and learned all about this business. I was just astounded at how many things a professional soccer team does. Basically, they have something like hundreds of thousands of fee-paying members. And they have a totally different model. And this sports team has just grown. And now they have university programs. They have high school programs. They have a gym for the public. This institution. So why is this institution so much more successful than others in the area? Because fundamentally, a sports team has to have meritocracy. That has to lead. If you lead with nepotism or corruption, which of course these things are present, you will lose. There's a very clear form of accountability, and so over time, the sports team has built trust because it has meritocracy. It just is a fact, whether we like it or not, that family businesses tend to prevail in Latin America because people trust their family more than the general public, and they dominate. It's not an accident that they have oligarchic families, and they are demonized. I don't demonize them. I think in general, a lot of them are very good. They're keeping these countries together, so I don't demonize them. Further, one of the challenges with doing business is just that if you know you're in a fragile situation, so right now, for example, Honduras is close to becoming another communist dictatorship. This is just a fact of life, unfortunately. The current regime or current administration is buddies with the Cubans, and they want to try to get reelected and change the constitution. Their name is literally the Refoundation and Liberty Party, Libre. Anyway, so when you know that there's instability, you basically cannot plan much beyond 3 years. I just know that if you've got a project in Latin America and you want investors, they want their money back within 3 years. How can you plan for major infrastructure, whatever, if that's your time frame for planning? So, like I said, it's a tough challenge to face up to, this low trust environment. And what it means, like I said, is that the few businesses that have meritocracy will grow, and those that are family based will grow, and that's what you observe, right? And maybe modern technology will disrupt this. I'm hopeful, and there are many reasons to be hopeful. So I don't want us to be all a downer. I just want to describe the situation as it is, and not sugarcoat it. Yeah.
Yeah, and technology may help, but I mean, technology can't give you trust necessarily. I mean, maybe in some levels there'll be a level of accountability, but I think it is an interesting point you make there. Is this may explain why there's so many family businesses or family enterprises in Latin America, is because it may be the only people you can trust, right? And so it's hard to get at, outside that circle. Maybe the trust level just really deteriorates a lot.
Yeah, and so people can make a negative view of it. And I say, actually, I just think they're being rational. So I don't demonize them for it. I say, if you live in a low trust society, working with family makes a lot of sense. So nepotism is a rational strategy within that environment. And I guess the challenge is, for many people, is that we observe this somewhat arriving in the United States, that there is a rise of gated communities. When I was a kid, and I assume it was the same for you when you're growing up, that I never even knew what a gated community was. But that's becoming a regular part of American life.
Yeah, it is, especially down here in South Florida.
Yeah.
But, another thing I wanted to, just follow up on something you said before. I'm a fan of this too. The reimposition, I guess you could say, of the Monroe Doctrine. And I agree with you totally. I'm not for it in the sense of, wanting it to launch any kind of interventions into different Latin American countries. Just more that, this is our sphere of influence. And others, maybe China, Russia, whatever, don't need to come into it. And to be honest with you, they might have something to say about their sphere of influence in Asia or Europe or something, right?
Sure.
But when we look about all the money and all the things that we've done all around the world, I mean, we are the world's global police now. We are the empire, we are the superpower. I guess we're vying for that with China now. And I'm not saying that we did it to become, that. It's just more that we just happen to be the largest power, and economically, politically, what have you. And also I think we're that place in a particular time in history when we're really more culturally powerful now than ever before too, mostly due to television and the internet and all these things. In some ways we don't necessarily want to be, right? I mean, we got Islamic terrorists that didn't like MTV, in some of their countries, right? And so in some ways the culture kind of dominance isn't always helpful in some ways. But anyway, going back to this, looking at some of the there's China, for example, is really trying to infiltrate Latin America, and and in some ways they are bribing these Latin American countries through well, you could say the dollar or the yuan or whatever the heck they're bribing them through, but they're building things for these countries. They're building tunnels and bridges and highways and all sorts of things. They're ports, right? Why isn't the United States, maybe that's the way we should be helping Latin America rather than sending actual physical dollars? Why don't we actually like help them build some infrastructure and tell the Chinese we got this covered and you can go back to Asia? What do you think about this?
No, mate. Oh gosh. Well, it has already happened, right? They've already done it. So
right.
The last time I checked, more Latin American countries now have China as their number one trading partner than have the United States, right? Which, even Panama, right? How is that even possible, right? 20, 30 years ago, that would be unthinkable, that the US would not be the major trading partner of all these Latin American nations. Still is the major trading partner with places like Guatemala and Honduras, but China has made incredible inroads into Latin America. And as you say, it hasn't been in a completely, let's say, free market fashion. A lot of it has been in a crony or public-private partnership fashion. And I have a couple of chapters on this, and also there's a lengthy paper, well, not that lengthy, but a paper I recommend in the additional resources by the Center for a Secure Free Society. It's called, I think it's called the Condor and another, anyway. The Condor, what's the Chinese emblem? Anyway, so there's a lengthy paper discussing the strategy that the Chinese are using, and it comes in from many different directions, right? They'll have loans, they'll have infrastructure projects, they'll have diplomacy. They're trying to avoid, at this stage, a full-on kinetic or full-on physical conflict. Although I suspect at some point it'll come to that. Now, this spread, though, with basically just a rapid retreat from the United States, says more about the United States than about China, to be frank. That it just is the case that the United States is less of a lucrative investor, buyer than she was 25 years ago. And it says in my book that I'm a chartered alternative investment analyst or charter holder in that regard. And one of the great sections of that curriculum was on geopolitics, and it really changed my thinking a bit. And I know this is not going to be, music to the ears of many more libertarian types, but it just is the case that the eras of British dominance and US dominance, and yes, in an imperialistic fashion, were great eras for expansion of global trade. Because there was one institution or one entity basically maintaining a series of rules internationally. And we might be, let's say, skeptical of the US federal government or skeptical of British Empire, whatever it may be, fine. But they were the arbiter of international disputes. And a relatively benevolent, people might disagree with me, but relatively benevolent arbiter. But since the global financial crisis of 2008, the US has been in rapid retreat internationally. And I don't see that turning around anytime soon. We've all seen these lovely curves of the national debt and the interest payments going like this. And it just is the case that the US doesn't really have the economic wherewithal anymore to go around with a whole bunch of new projects like they did to rebuild Germany or rebuild Japan. I don't see that happening. But at the same time, I don't want the Chinese to become the leaders of the new global order, or the Chinese Communist Party to be more specifically. And that is a real problem. So I have in the book promoted the idea of at least competing or trying to keep them out of the region. Now, how you do that, there are many different ways, but it would take some more engagement than a completely hands-off approach. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, in the coming years here, and with the Chinese influence continuing to seem to increase in many different ways, and also, as you mentioned, it's not just China, it's the Chinese Communist Party, and then what they're doing to ally themselves with Cuba and Venezuela and all these other places to put some markers down in Latin America. Though, one other comment though for you on this book, and you know just kind of reminded me of it. One of the great things I think about your book here is it is a great starting point, I think, for people for Latin America as well, because it's not just your writing, you're constantly citing books and articles, just like you've done here a few times in the course of this conversation. And so you've just got a lot of references. You're even the back of the book, tons of references, but you do it throughout while you're actually writing the different articles. And so it really, I think, can spark for people, like maybe you're interested in a particular place in Latin America, maybe it's Cuba, maybe it's Colombia, whatever, and you then give us some other book that really was formative to your thinking. And so it's an opportunity for us to go then, go down a path, maybe go down the rabbit hole a little bit ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I do list an additional resources section, and I need to add another footnote back to this because I note here the open veins of Latin America, and I should have a note there saying that this is there for reference, not because I agree with the guy. But no, so that's the challenge that I just plowed into this. I just took in everything I could, Francisco, and you know this. I just watched every single movie, read every single book I could on the topic. And I know that not everyone is going to have 10 to 15 years to basically do his own PhD or whatever, master's degree on a private basis in the field. So yeah, I've put those additional resources, and I also just have some essays that I think are relevant. One that I wrote, but was a co-author with. I mean, there's a great one. You probably read it, The Last Communist City, in City Journal about Cuba.
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's in City Journal, which is a wonderful publication by the Manhattan Institute. And a gentleman went there and wrote about his experience. This is from 2014, and it is just, it's powerful. There is also a course which I took with University of Pennsylvania, which is for free, and you can just get all the videos. They're all online. It's called The Economic History of Latin America from 2023, an open online course. Great, rigorous academic or intellectual content about Latin America. So there really are wonderful stories. I've put in at least one fiction novel here. There's a piece of history, Brothers, from time to time by David Landau. It's a great book of primary history of the first-hand accounts of two brothers who grew up on both sides of the revolution. And like I said, I mean, there's a lot there. I also...
Well, Fergus, instead of you just reading this off, people are going to have to order your book on Amazon, The Latin America Red Pill. It's by Fergus Hodgson. It's a great book. And again, it's a really good starter. And I think we'll open, just as you were saying, it's kind of like an opening. And one thing I've always said about books for a long time now, the more I understand them, and even being a writer myself, is people literally spend years gaining an experience to be able to write about something that they then may spend months or years actually in the physical writing of it. And in a matter of hours, you can absorb all of that information. So Fergus here has spent over 15 years down in Latin America, and has talked to a lot of people, read a lot of books, seen some movies, as you mentioned, all these sorts of things. Yeah. There's been a lot of chicken buses, I'm sure, and all sorts of things in between.
Absolutely.
And, and so you don't have to do that. I mean, you could come down and try a week with Fearless Journeys, but you don't have to do 15 years in Latin America. You could just get his book, The Latin America Red Pill, and then, that may take you down some other paths yourself, some of the different sources he's introducing you to. So I really recommend it for people. I mean, even somebody like me, who I feel I'm very well acquainted with Latin America, been to a lot of countries, studied a lot of history, and I'm even reading this with wow, I didn't know this, or I look at this source that he, or this story that he had that was really interesting. So I think whether you're like a novice or whether you're somebody who's very well acquainted, this could be a great resource for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's like I said, it's great to hear from someone like you, Francisco, because I know you're not just the man on the street. You really have a lot of familiarity with this region. And you've done the positive thing. You're really trying to be productive, right? You're trying to find corners where you can make things work. And so I know I think you took a group to Bariloche. I mean, you've gone to beautiful parts of Argentina. And I mentioned in the book, I don't know if you've got to any of the Argentina chapters yet, but I got fat on empanadas there because I love them. So go there and try the empanadas. They're amazing. So
Yeah, if you go to Argentina for as long as Fergus went there, you'll have to get into running or rowing like he has, because otherwise there's nothing that's going to keep the pounds off with all that steak and empanadas and all the nice bakeries and everything.
There's one more little pitch I'll make, actually, Francisco, and you read this in the introduction. One reason why I published this book and put myself out there, stuck my neck out there, like I said, it is politically incorrect, is that many people don't want you to know this. Basically, like, they don't want the truth to get out. So in the introductory chapter, I mentioned that one of the great influences on me was the Institute for Cuban and Cuban American Studies, which used to be at the University of Miami. And all these great men who had left Cuba, and even many of them had fought in the Bay of Pigs fiasco, who had been political prisoners, they were there sharing their stories with this organization. And basically, a leftist Mexican became president of Miami and just shut it all down and fired them all right away. He did not want these guys sharing their anti-communist message, which to me just made me furious, but that's what happened. And so I just feel like I found there a gem of history that you just wouldn't find, even by reading the Miami Herald, if you can believe it. I'm doing my best to offer that same perspective in my own book, that giving a perspective you just won't find in the academic world, but which I think is crucial to the discussion.
You know, what's interesting when you talk about that at University of Miami, that was also when that program existed, was really rare in the larger academia for that to exist. But the reason it did was because it's hard to ignore, if you're at the University of Miami, what surrounds you every step you take off that campus. And also the great intellectuals, right? The great entrepreneurs that have come and built Miami, and all the intellectuals and the people sharing their stories, the military history, all these sorts of things. And what's really sad is that they even had to succumb to the greater academic pressures, right? I mean, this person that came in, whether they're a communist or just from some other,
personally,
right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the fact is, they're living it. I'm sure that they had pressures at the very least, if they didn't have the personal beliefs themselves, to say, what are you doing, allowing, you know, these anti-communist messages to be shared when a lot of academia wants to promote something else. So it's a real rarity to find that, as it is in academia. It's sad that it got shut down. But I will say, one of the greatest educations anyone can have about communism is to come spend some time in Miami. And especially today, Fergus, in the last couple years, it is very difficult to get in an Uber in Miami and not have your driver be like fresh from either Cuba or Venezuela within the last year. I mean, it's really amazing. It just shows you that you take people from all these countries. I mean, even countries that aren't communist necessarily, maybe Guatemala or semi-communist Nicaragua and Colombia, all these places, and they literally leave a place they could not succeed in. That's why they left. And you could bring them to a different place with a different structure, a different government, a different system, a different culture, and they flourish. And by the way, when they're your Uber driver, which is just step one in their step into American society, they are constantly preaching to you in the Ubers in Miami how bad socialism is. I mean, it is really remarkable to me. And a lot of times they don't speak English. So, but you'll if you just ask like one question, you'll start getting. You'll start going down the rabbit hole with people, and they'll tell you how great America is in a time when a lot of people maybe are doubting the American dream, right? These people are not wasting it, Fergus, and they're literally preaching to you how great this country is versus where they just came from, where they may still have family.
Yeah, Francisco, I would love to talk longer. I mean, I just about 2 weeks ago, I watched the film La Bestia, which made it into the book as a recommendation, and it tells the story of the people going from Central America to the United States on the trains through Mexico, just on top. And they get stolen from, raped. I mean, they lose their limbs. It is so brutal. That just tells you the strength of the American dream it still carries for them. Yeah. So if anyone doubts, you've also
had your own American dream story coming here from New Zealand. I mean, a great country that is still, actually, Fergus, it remains one of the top 2 or 3 countries on my I want to visit list I haven't been to yet. So
Yeah.
Maybe one day we'll be there with you. I don't know how often you go back, but but your story is also emblematic of that, where maybe it was for some other opportunities that you came here for, but you found a life and a place, and also other countries nearby you wanted to visit. So you're emblematic of that, and I know we've been talking here for a while. We could probably continue this conversation for a long time and keep going down rabbit holes, but I do want to once again recommend the book here, and also Fergus. Actually, I have one last thing to talk to you about, and that is we've hinted at it a few times, but you've grown up an athlete. You tried out for the Olympics in New Zealand in rowing. I believe recently you were trying out for something with running, and your running still continues. And tell me a little bit about your current or your athletic trajectory.
Francisco, I would love to. To be frank, I have another meeting in 4 minutes, so we have to hold that one for next time.
So what you're telling me is you got to run. You got to run once again. Fergus
I do have
has
to run to another online meeting. Yeah. So
Fergus, tell us how people can find you and connect with you.
Okay, please follow me on Twitter at Ferg Hodgson, and please, yes, consider buying the book. This has got a piece of my heart is in this baby. So any support is appreciated. And if you want to reach out to me, it also has email address and more details inside. But no, Twitter is the best place, or Twitter or X at Ferg Hodgson.
Yeah, great. Well, I follow you there, and we'll put that in the show notes, and hopefully people can connect with you there. But Fergus, I just want to say thanks for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast, and thanks for being an agent of innovation yourself.
Thank you, Francisco, for being a great role model in this field. Cheers.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.